Vielen Dank für die Einladung. Thank you for having me here in the studio. It's a pleasure to be back in Bern, Canton Bern in Biel. I spent a year here as a postdoc at the University of Bern, so I know the region well, and I'm very pleased to be here again. Today I'm going to talk a little bit about my interest in Walser, how I came to Walser, and my own work on him, the future directions that I'd like to take my scholarship in, and I think the sort of everyday relevance of Walser, not only to a general public, but specifically to an American reading public, where Walser, I think, has occupied a unique role. I first came to Walser when I read the novel Jakob von Gunten. I didn't have much background, and I remember just being absolutely tickled by the novel. And as a scholar, as somebody who works on books all the time, I thought this was a unique experience. It's rare to actually read as a reader. I think I spend a lot of my time reading as a scholar or a critic. And one of the things I found so exuberant and invigorating about Walser, particularly Jakob von Gunten, was that I was able to sort of rediscover the joy of reading as a reader. And I found the novel to be funny, ironic, and of course, unexpected in many ways. And I think to me that experience of reading Walser as a reader rather than a critic was also instrumental in sort of summoning my own interest in Walser as an author. So I've had the chance to read him independently, but together with Retozorg, we organized a conference on Spazieren, also the book Spazieren muss ich unbedingt, where we talked about Walser's relationship with walking, and specifically the interrelationship between walking and writing, which I think is so important for Walser, but also so important for many of the other authors, including Sebald, who were inspired by Walser's work. My talk today thematizes it really starts, I think, with a question which I've had for a long time as a Walser scholar, which is, why is Walser so sort of experiencing this renaissance also in America? You have authors ranging from Jonathan Franzen, who claimed that Walser was one of his most sort of prominent literary alter egos, to critics like Ben Lerner and Benjamin Kunkel, who've written in the New Yorker about Walser's work and relevance. And so my question was, I think, a very simple one: why is Walser so interesting to American readers? And of course, I think in large part, one of the main reasons is that they've been in the hands of an incredibly talented translator, Susan Bernofsky, along with Damien Searles, who've done a really wonderful job translating his work into English. So of course, there's that, which I think is probably one of the most important factors. But I'm also thinking on the level of themes. Why is Walser relevant to Americans? And one of the things I'll talk about today is Walser's novel Jakob von Gunten, namely my first love in Walser's texts. And I think for me, what he thematizes in this novel, Jakob von Gunten, is precisely this kind of whimsical desire for self-authorization, for authenticating and inventing the self. Jakob von Gunten, as you might remember, voluntarily severs his connection from his family and joins an institute, a servant training institute, where he becomes an avid pupil. So the question is, why would somebody who comes from a very fancy and sort of upscale household such as Jakob von Gunten do this? he does it, and he says he wants to start his life over. He wants to write his own life. And I think in part what attracts an American reading public to Walser is precisely this interest in self-invention, which Walser captures in this novel. And at the same time, the sort of tension between self-invention and the kind of complex lineage with one's past, which Gunden is constantly trying to escape, his sort of, and he says he wants to start his life von unten instead of von Gunden, right? So there is kind of always this ambivalence between trying to start over. And I think that is particularly interesting to American readers who have a very complicated relationship with their own European cultural inheritance. So a sort of an ambivalent interest in reinventing oneself as a culture, using various models of literary and cultural interpretation, but at the same time trying to maintain ties with one's past. And that to me is sort of very nicely encapsulated in Jakob von Gunden's relationship with his own literary inheritance. So I think the directions that I could take this work in are multifaceted. I'm currently working on a project that examines the role of the orphan in literature. Why is the orphan such a prominent part of the literary imagination, ranging from sort of early orphans like in Moses and Muhammad, for instance, in religious texts, to the Dickensian orphan, to people like Heidi, which we've all read and encountered, particularly in children's literature. You see it often in myth and fairy tale. The orphan plays an important role. And so my question is, why do we keep coming back to this figure of the orphan in literature? And so Walser fits into this text, into this sort of project in a kind of unorthodox way, as might be telling in its own way. Because for me, Jakob von Gunden is not an orphan, obviously. He's not a traditional orphan, but he's somebody who declares himself an orphan, who casts himself in the position of orphan, sort of in dialogue with many of the orphans that have come before him, specifically in Dickens' novels, but perhaps also in relationship to his country person, Heidi, who was orphaned by fate. Jakob von Gunden is interested in sort of constructing himself as an orphan, in rewriting his script. And this desire to be a null, in his own words, is what I'm arguing a kind of fantasy of tabula rasa, or blank slate, starting one's life over, writing it according to one's own terms. So Jakob von Gunden kind of embodies this fantasy that orphans play in our cultural imagination, to be the author of our own fate, to take sort of the script away from our parents, but to do it, to write it ourselves. And to me, I think Jakob von Gunden is very interesting precisely on those lines, and that might also help to sort of explain the novel's particular relevance to an American reading public. And as an entryway into Walser himself, I think many readers I've known and many American readers have really discovered Walser first by reading novels such as Jakob von Gunden, and then discovering his larger corpus.